The phone call that changed my life forever came on a rainy Tuesday morning in Phoenix. My beloved grandmother Dorothy had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind a crumbling Victorian mansion in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. But sitting in that sterile law office 3 days later, listening to her will being read, I discovered the most shocking inheritance condition imaginable. To claim her $3 million estate, I had to live completely alone in that deteriorating house for 30 consecutive days with only basic utilities and no outside financial support whatsoever. My wealthy cousins Marcus and Janet exchanged smirks across the mahogany table, absolutely certain I would abandon this impossible challenge within a single week, allowing them to split Dorothy's fortune between themselves instead. The 6-hour drive from the airport to Millbrook gave me plenty of time to second-guess every decision that led me to this moment. My beat-up Honda Civic groaned under the weight of my hastily packed belongings as I navigated the winding Pennsylvania backroads toward what felt like my doom. When I finally pulled into the circular driveway of Dorothy's mansion, my heart sank deeper than I thought possible. The 3-story Victorian house looked like something from a horror movie. Paint peeled from every surface in long, curling strips that fluttered in the autumn breeze. Several shutters hung at odd angles, barely clinging to their hinges. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously, and I could see daylight through gaps in the roof tiles. Weeds had completely overtaken what must have once been beautiful gardens, growing so tall they nearly reached the first-floor windows. I sat in my car for 10 full minutes staring at this monument to neglect and wondering what kind of twisted game my grandmother was playing from beyond the grave. Dorothy had always been the kindest, most loving person in our family. She sent me birthday cards with handwritten notes, remembered my art show openings, even when my own parents forgot, and always made me feel special during our 2 rare visits. This felt like punishment, rather than inheritance. The front door key turned easily, but the heavy wooden door itself required my full body weight to push open. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing through what sounded like an enormous empty space. Stepping inside, I was immediately hit by the musty smell of abandonment, mixed with something floral that reminded me of Dorothy's perfume. The interior was both better and worse than I expected. Better because the basic structure seemed sound with gorgeous hardwood floors and intricate crown molding that spoke to the house's former grandeur. Worse because everything was covered in a thick layer of dust spider webs draped from every corner like abandoned party decorations, and I could hear the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. My footsteps echoed as I explored room after room of mostly empty spaces. The electricity worked when I flipped switches, though many of the light fixtures were missing bulbs. The kitchen faucet produced rusty water for several minutes before running clear. The ancient refrigerator hummed to life when I plugged it in, but the freezer compartment was thick with ice. In the front parlor, I found an envelope with my name written in Dorothy's familiar handwriting, propped against the mantelpiece like she knew exactly where I would look first. Inside were 50 $20 bills and a single sheet of paper with rules typed in her precise style. Dearest Brielle, welcome to your temporary home. The rules are simple, but absolute. No visitors except for emergencies, no food deliveries or takeout, no leaving the property except for grocery shopping or true emergencies. You have basic utilities but no cable television or internet service. Complete 30 consecutive days following these rules and everything becomes yours. Break any rule and the inheritance goes to Marcus and Janet. Trust the house to teach you what you need to learn. All my love, Grandma Dorothy. $1,000 felt like a fortune, and nothing at all simultaneously. I had no idea how much groceries cost in a small Pennsylvania town, but I suspected this would need to stretch for the entire month. That first evening, I called my mother Sarah from the ancient rotary phone in the kitchen, the only working telephone I could find. Her voice sounded strained when she answered like she'd been expecting bad news. Brielle, honey, are you really going through with this ridiculous challenge your cousins are telling everyone you've lost your mind? Mom, it's what Dorothy wanted. I have to at least try. But sweetheart, you don't understand the family politics involved here. Marcus and Janet have been circling like vultures ever since your grandfather died. They convinced their parents that Dorothy was getting senile, that she couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. This whole situation just proves their point. The conversation left me feeling more isolated than ever. Even my own mother seemed to think I was fighting a losing battle. That first night in the master bedroom was absolutely miserable. The house had no central heating, and the space heater I found in the closet barely made a dent in the bone-deep chill. Strange creaking noises echoed through the walls as the old house settled around me. Every shadow seemed to move in my peripheral vision. Around midnight, I was lying in bed questioning every life choice that brought me to this point when I decided to explore more of the house to distract myself from the cold and fear. Armed with a flashlight, I made my way down to the basement, hoping to find the furnace and figure out why there was no heat. The basement was a maze of stone walls and wooden support beams that created dozens of dark alcoves, perfect for hiding things. I was examining what looked like an old coal chute when my flashlight beam caught something unusual. Behind a tall bookshelf filled with dusty canning jars, there was a gap in the stone wall just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. My heart pounding, I managed to move the bookshelf just enough to slip into the hidden space. What I found there stopped me dead in my tracks. The small room was filled with dozens of my childhood drawings and paintings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves and organized chronologically. There were crayon masterpieces I had made at age 5, watercolor experiments from middle school, and even some of my high school portfolio pieces I thought had been thrown away years ago. On a small table in the center of the room sat an open journal with Dorothy's handwriting. The page it was turned to was dated just 6 months earlier. Brielle called today to tell me she got the teaching job in Phoenix. She sounded so defeated, like she's given up on her dreams entirely. The family has always treated her artistic gifts like they were worthless hobbies instead of real talents. I see so much of myself in her, how I let others convince me that practical choices were more important than following my heart. Maybe it's not too late for both of us to find our way back to what truly matters. I sat on the cold basement floor surrounded by evidence of a grandmother's love I never fully understood and cried until my tears ran dry. The second morning brought weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows and a determination I hadn't felt in years. Dorothy's hidden shrine to my abandoned artistic dreams had awakened something fierce inside me. If she believed in my talents enough to preserve every scrap of my childhood creativity, maybe I owed it to both of us to take this challenge seriously. I spent the morning systematically exploring every inch of the house, and my grandmother's secrets seemed endless. Behind a loose panel in the dining room wall, I discovered a collection of vintage jewelry wrapped in silk scarves. Under a squeaky floorboard in the library, there were bundles of old letters tied with ribbon. Each hiding spot revealed another layer of Dorothy's carefully guarded private world. But it was the attic that truly took my breath away. Climbing the narrow staircase to the third floor, I expected to find the usual accumulation of forgotten furniture and holiday decorations. Instead, I walked into a treasure trove that belonged in a museum. Paintings lined every wall, some in elaborate gold frames, and others still stretched on their original canvases. I recognized the styles of several famous American artists from the 1940s and 50s pieces that would be worth tens of thousands of dollars each. There were abstract expressionist works that reminded me of Jackson Pollock, delicate watercolor landscapes in the style of Andrew Wyeth, and bold modernist pieces that could have come from Georgia O'Keeffe's studio. In the center of the room sat an easel with a half-finished painting of the view from the attic window, showing the overgrown gardens in what must have been their former glory. Dorothy's signature was visible in the corner, and I realized with shock that my grandmother had been a serious artist herself. Scattered across a long wooden table were correspondence files, organized by year. Flipping through them, I found letters from gallery owners, art dealers, and auction houses spanning decades. Dorothy hadn't just been collecting art, she'd been actively buying and selling pieces, building what appeared to be a sophisticated investment portfolio based on her eye for emerging talent. One letter from a New York gallery owner dated just 2 years earlier thanked Dorothy for her continued support of struggling artists and mentioned a generous donation that will fund 3 full scholarships this year. Another letter from a local college administrator expressed gratitude for an anonymous benefactor who'd been funding art supplies for students who couldn't afford them. The phone rang, startling me out of my treasure-hunting reverie. I hurried downstairs to answer the kitchen extension, expecting another worried call from my mother. Brielle. This is Tom Richardson from next door. I've been keeping an eye on Dorothy's place since she passed, and I saw you arrive yesterday. Thought you might like some fresh vegetables from our garden. Tom turned out to be a weathered man in his 70s, with kind eyes and hands permanently stained from decades of gardening. He lived in a neat farmhouse about half a mile down the road and had been Dorothy's closest neighbor for over 30 years. Your grandmother was quite a woman, he said, setting a basket of tomatoes, squash, and green beans on the kitchen counter. She talked about you, constantly showed me pictures of your art projects, bragged about every accomplishment. She was so proud of you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. Tom, can I ask you something? Did Dorothy seem mentally sharp to you in her final months? My cousins are claiming she wasn't competent to write a valid will. Tom's expression darkened immediately. Those 2 vultures have been sniffing around for years trying to convince anyone who would listen that Dorothy was losing her mind. Complete nonsense. She was sharper at 92 than most people half her age. Just last month, she was helping me plan a complex crop rotation schedule for next spring. Her mind was clear as a bell right up to the end. That afternoon, I received the first of what would become daily harassment calls from Marcus and Janet. Marcus, the older cousin who had always treated me like an annoying child, didn't even bother with pleasantries. Brielle, this whole charade has gone far enough. You're living in a condemned building with no heat, no proper food, and no safety net. What happens when you get hurt or sick? What happens when you realize you're wasting your time on a dead woman's delusions? I'm fine, Marcus. The house is structurally sound and I have everything I need. You have nothing. Janet's voice cut in on what was obviously a conference call. You're a struggling art teacher living paycheck to paycheck, sleeping in a house that should be torn down. This isn't what Dorothy really wanted. She would be horrified to see you suffering like this. After I hung up, I walked through the house with new eyes, seeing past the surface decay to the bones of something beautiful. The hardwood floors just needed refinishing. The windows needed cleaning and new weather stripping. The walls needed fresh paint and some minor plaster repair. None of it was beyond fixing with enough time and effort. For the first time in months, I felt inspired to create something. I found an old sketch pad in Dorothy's desk and spent the evening drawing architectural details I had never noticed before: the intricate woodwork around the door frames, the delicate plaster flowers that decorated the ceiling medallions, the way afternoon light created geometric patterns on the library floor. As I was preparing for bed, I decided to take one more look at Dorothy's bedroom, hoping to find clues about her artistic background. The room was sparse compared to the rest of the house, containing only a simple bed dresser and rocking chair. But something about the arrangement seemed deliberately minimal, like everything non-essential had been purposefully removed. I was examining the oil painting that hung above the bed, a serene landscape that looked familiar, but which I couldn't place when I noticed it was hanging slightly crooked. Straightening it, I heard a soft click, and the painting swung outward on hidden hinges. Behind it was a wall safe I never would have found if not for pure accident. The digital lock required a 6-digit combination, and attached to the safe door was an envelope marked, "For my dearest artist." Inside the envelope was a letter in Dorothy's handwriting. "Brielle, if you're reading this, it means you've made it past the first few days and are beginning to see the house as I always have, full of hidden treasures and untold stories. The combination to this safe holds the most important documents related to your inheritance, but you'll need to earn the numbers by understanding what truly mattered to me. Look for the clues I've left throughout our home, and remember that the greatest treasures are never the ones that glitter." I stared at the safe for a long time that night, running my fingers over the digital keypad and wondering what other secrets Dorothy had hidden in this remarkable house. 6 numbers that would unlock the most important part of my inheritance, but I had no idea where to begin looking for the clues she mentioned. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the loose shutters and whistling through gaps in the window frames. But for the first time since arriving, the sounds didn't frighten me. They sounded like the house was talking, sharing its secrets with someone finally ready to listen. By the end of my first week in Millbrook, I had developed something resembling a routine. Mornings were for house repairs and cleaning. Afternoons were for sketching and exploring Dorothy's hidden treasures. Evenings were for reading through her correspondence and trying to piece together the puzzle of her secret life as an art patron and collector. But I was running dangerously low on supplies, and the $50 Dorothy had left me wouldn't stretch much further. Reluctantly, I drove into town to find a grocery store, hoping to make my remaining money last for the 3 weeks still ahead of me. Millbrook turned out to be one of those classic American small towns that time seemed to have forgotten. Main Street was lined with brick buildings from the early 1900s, most of them housing family-owned shops with hand-painted signs and window displays that hadn't changed in decades. There was a hardware store, a pharmacy with an old-fashioned soda fountain, a used bookstore with towers of paperbacks spilling onto the sidewalk, and a single traffic light that blinked yellow in all directions. The grocery store was smaller than any I had ever shopped in, with narrow aisles and shelves, stocked with a carefully curated selection of basics, rather than the overwhelming variety I was used to in Phoenix. But what struck me most was how many people seemed to recognize me, even though I had never been to Millbrook before. "You must be Dorothy's granddaughter," said the teenage cashier, scanning my modest pile of canned goods and pasta. "Mrs. Patterson at the library told everyone you were staying at the house. That's so cool that you're actually doing the challenge." Challenge? Oh, everyone knows about Dorothy's will. She talked about it for months before she died, how she was going to give her favorite granddaughter a chance to discover what really mattered in life. Most people thought it was a brilliant idea, honestly. I paid for my groceries with a growing sense that I was part of some elaborate community theater production, where everyone knew their roles except me. My next stop was the library, a beautiful Carnegie building with tall windows and reading tables that looked like they had been hosting serious discussions for over a century. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, looked up from her computer with obvious delight when I walked in. "Brielle, I'm Patricia Caldwell. Dorothy talked about you so often I feel like we're already friends. How are you settling in at the house?" "It's been an adjustment, but I'm managing." The cashier at the grocery store mentioned that Dorothy talked publicly about her will. Patricia's expression grew thoughtful. "Your grandmother was very deliberate about everything she did, especially in her final year. She wanted the community to understand her decision, partly to protect you from gossip, but mostly because she hoped we would support you during your month there." She led me to a corner table stacked with local history books and newspaper clippings. "Dorothy asked me to prepare these materials for you things about the house and its place in Millbrook's history. Did you know your family's mansion was built by the town's founding father in 1878? It was the social center of the community for decades, hosting charity events and art exhibitions. The historical documents painted a picture of the house as it must have been in its glory days, elegant parties spilling out onto manicured lawns, local artists displaying their work in the grand parlor community meetings in the library to plan civic improvements. Dorothy had been trying to maintain that tradition well into her 80s, hosting annual fundraisers for various local causes until her health began to decline. She never stopped believing the house could serve the community again, Patricia said softly. But it would need someone young and creative to bring it back to life. I spent 2 hours reading through Dorothy's documented community involvement, and the scope of her quiet generosity was staggering. She had funded scholarships donated to food banks, supported the volunteer fire department, and helped several local families avoid foreclosure during tough economic times. all of it done anonymously with Patricia, often serving as the intermediary to protect Dorothy's privacy. "Why didn't anyone in my family know about this?" I asked. Dorothy was very particular about keeping her charitable work separate from family dynamics. She felt that Marcus and Janet would disapprove of her spending choices, and she didn't want to deal with their criticism or demands for control over her decisions. Walking back to my car with arms full of library books, I nearly collided with a young woman struggling to manage 2 grocery bags, a diaper bag, and a squirming toddler who was clearly having a meltdown in the middle of the sidewalk. "Here, let me help," I said, reaching for one of her bags before she could protest. "Thank you so much. Emma, sweetie, we're almost home. Just a few more minutes." The little girl, who looked to be about 4 years old, had tears streaming down her cheeks and was clutching a broken crayon in her tiny fist. "It broke. My special red. Crayon broke." "Sssss. Oh, honey, we'll get you a new box of crayons next week when Mommy gets paid." Something about the exhaustion in the woman's voice and the careful way she talked about money next week resonated deeply with my own recent struggles as an underpaid teacher. I introduced myself as we walked toward her car, learning that she was Linda Rodriguez, a single mother working 2 part-time jobs to support herself and Emma. "Emma loves to draw," Linda explained, buckling her daughter into her car seat. "She's incredibly talented for her age, but art supplies are so expensive. I keep promising her we'll buy good crayons and paper, but there's always something more urgent that needs the money." I thought about the art supplies I had seen in Dorothy's house, probably worth more than Linda made in a month sitting unused in storage closets. "Linda, would you mind if I brought Emma some art supplies? I'm staying at my grandmother's house, and she has more than anyone could ever use." I couldn't accept charity. "It's not charity. I'm an art teacher, and seeing talent in young children is one of my greatest joys. Please let me do this." That evening, I drove back to Linda's modest apartment with a box full of colored pencils, markers, sketch pads, and paints I had found in Dorothy's closets. Emma's face when she saw the supplies was pure magic, the kind of joy that reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. But my good deed had unintended consequences. When I returned to the house around 8 o'clock, I discovered that someone had thrown rocks through 2 first-floor windows and spray-painted "Go Home" in red letters across the front door. Broken glass crunched under my feet as I surveyed the damage, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. I was sweeping up glass when Tom Richardson appeared at my door with a concerned expression and a security camera in his hands. I heard the noise and saw headlights speeding away around 7:30. Figured something like this might happen eventually. Your cousins drove by here twice yesterday, slowing down to stare at the house. "You think Marcus and Janet did this?" "I think they're getting desperate. Dorothy's lawyer called me this afternoon to check on your progress. Word is they've been pressuring him to declare the will invalid, claiming you're not mentally competent to complete the challenge." Tom helped me install the security camera to cover the front entrance and driveway. As we worked, he shared more stories about Dorothy's final months and her growing excitement about the inheritance plan she was developing. She was convinced this house could change your life, just like it changed hers when she was a young bride. Your grandfather brought her here as a newlywed in 1952, and she told me it took her months to see past the overwhelming size and complexity to find the heart of the place. That night, lying in bed and listening to the wind rattle my newly boarded up windows, I realized that the house was beginning to feel less like a prison and more like a fortress. Someone was trying to drive me away, which meant I was doing something right. Dorothy's challenge was becoming my fight, and I was finally ready to stop running from it. Around midnight, I was awakened by a soft scraping sound coming from somewhere below my bedroom. Grabbing my flashlight, I crept downstairs to investigate, wondering if the vandals had returned for another round of intimidation. But what I found was far more intriguing than vandalism. In the kitchen, one of the loose floorboards had shifted, revealing a small metal box wedged between the floor joists. Inside the box was another piece of the puzzle Dorothy had been constructing, a handwritten note with 3 numbers and a message that made my pulse quicken. My dearest artist, you're learning to see the house as I always have, full of hidden beauty and unexpected treasures. The first three numbers of the safe combination are 279, representing the date I first realized this house could be more than just a home. It could be a legacy. Find the remaining numbers by discovering what I built here that will outlast us both. 279. I memorized the numbers and carefully replaced everything else exactly as I had found it. Somewhere in this house were three more numbers that would unlock Dorothy's most important secret, and I was beginning to suspect that the secret itself might be bigger than just my inheritance. The answer to Dorothy's riddle came to me 3 days later while I was organizing the correspondence files I had found in the attic. Reading through years of letters between Dorothy and various charitable organizations, I noticed a pattern in the dates when her largest donations had been made. She consistently gave significant amounts of money on September 15th, which happened to be my birthday. September 15th, 915. My heart pounding, I rushed to the bedroom safe and carefully entered the 6-digit combination, 279915. The lock clicked open with a satisfying mechanical sound that felt like the most important door of my life swinging wide. Inside the safe was a stack of legal documents that would have impressed any law office, but what caught my attention first was a manila folder labeled Marcus and Janet Evidence File in Dorothy's precise handwriting. The contents of that folder destroyed any remaining illusions I might have had about my cousin's character. Dorothy had been meticulously documenting their financial crimes for over 2 years, gathering evidence that painted a picture of systematic elder abuse spanning multiple family members. There were photocopies of forged checks drawn on their own parents' accounts, altered legal documents transferring property ownership, and even correspondence between Marcus and a corrupt financial advisor about managing elderly relatives' assets for their own good. Most damning of all were recorded phone conversations where they discussed plans to have Dorothy declared mentally incompetent so they could assume control of her estate. But the evidence file was just the beginning. Beneath it was a second legal document that made my hands tremble as I read it. Dorothy's real will dated 3 months after the version that had been read in the lawyer's office. According to this document, the 30-day challenge was never about testing my worthiness to inherit money. It was designed to keep me safely isolated while Dorothy's lawyer, William Chen, gathered the final pieces of evidence needed to prosecute Marcus and Janet for their crimes against multiple elderly family members. The inheritance itself was far more complex than I had understood. Dorothy had spent years working with the town of Millbrook to establish a permanent art foundation that would transform her house into a community cultural center. The $3 million mentioned in the public will was just the seed money for a much larger endowment she had been building through careful art investments and donations from other collectors who shared her vision. My role was never meant to be just an inheritor. I was being positioned to become the director of the Dorothy Walsh Memorial Art Foundation, overseeing programs for local artists, educational scholarships, and community cultural events. The house would remain in my name, but it would serve a public purpose that honored Dorothy's lifelong commitment to supporting artistic expression in small-town America. The final document in the safe was a letter addressed to me personally, dated just 1 week before Dorothy's death. My dearest Brielle, by the time you read this, you will understand that nothing about your month in this house has been coincidence. I have been watching you struggle in Phoenix, working a job that drains your spirit and living a life that ignores your greatest gifts. You are an artist, sweetheart, not just someone who teaches art to pay bills. This house, this foundation, this community needs someone with your vision and your heart. Marcus and Janet represent everything wrong with our family's relationship to money and inheritance. They see wealth as something to be hoarded and controlled, rather than as a tool for creating beauty and supporting others. Their crimes against our elderly relatives are unforgivable, but they also represent a deeper moral failure that I refuse to reward with inheritance. You, my dear granddaughter, understand what money should really do. You gave art supplies to a struggling child without a second thought. You see the beauty in this old house rather than just its monetary value. You have spent your adult life nurturing creativity in young people even when it meant financial struggle for yourself. The next few days will be challenging as the legal process unfolds, but remember that you are not alone. This entire community has been waiting for someone who shares my vision for what this house could become. I was still absorbing the magnitude of what I had discovered when the phone rang. William Chen's voice was calm but urgent when I answered. Brielle, I need you to be very careful over the next 24 hours. We've received credible information that Marcus and Janet are planning to contest the will more aggressively, possibly including attempts to physically remove you from the property. Are you safe there alone? I think so. Tom Richardson has been keeping an eye on things, and we installed a security camera after the vandalism. Good. I'm driving up from Philadelphia tonight to review the evidence with you and discuss our legal strategy. Under no circumstances should you let anyone into that house or leave the property for any reason other than a true emergency. Can you do that? I assured him I could handle one more night, but as evening fell, I found myself jumping at every sound. The security camera Tom had installed was motion activated, and I spent hours watching shadows trigger false alarms on the small monitor he had connected to the kitchen television. Around 9 o'clock, car headlights swept across the front windows as a vehicle pulled into the circular driveway. The security monitor showed two figures getting out of an expensive sedan, but the infrared image was too grainy to identify faces clearly. The aggressive pounding on the front door left no doubt about the visitors' identities. Marcus's voice carried clearly through the wooden panels. Brielle, open this door immediately. We have legal papers that invalidate Dorothy's ridiculous will. We know you're in there, Janet's voice added. This whole charade ends tonight. I remained silent, hoping they would eventually give up and leave. But instead of departing, they began circling the house, trying windows and doors, clearly looking for another way inside. Through the kitchen window, I could see a third figure lurking near their car, a man in an expensive suit who was talking on a cell phone. The breaking point came when they found the back door key hidden under a flower pot that Tom must have told them about. I heard the lock turning and footsteps entering the kitchen, followed by Marcus calling out in a voice that tried to sound reasonable but contained obvious threats. Brielle, we're coming in whether you cooperate or not. We have documentation that proves Dorothy was mentally incompetent when she wrote this will. You can make this easy on yourself by packing your things and leaving voluntarily, or we can have you removed by the police. That was when I remembered Dorothy's advice about trusting the house to teach me what I needed to learn. I had spent 2 weeks discovering her hidden treasures and secret passages. Now it was time to use that knowledge to protect myself. I slipped quietly into the basement through the door in the pantry, making my way to the hidden room where Dorothy had preserved my childhood artwork. From there, I could hear Marcus, Janet, and their companion searching the house above me, their voices growing more frustrated as they failed to locate me. But I wasn't just hiding. I was documenting everything. Tom's security system included audio recording capability, and every word they spoke was being preserved as evidence of their illegal entry and intimidation tactics. This house should have been condemned years ago. Janet's voice carried clearly through the old floorboards. Once we get rid of that girl and contest the will, we can sell this place to developers and split the money properly. The lawyer says the art collection alone is worth over $1 million. Marcus replied. Dorothy was hoarding valuable assets while claiming she needed to be careful with money. It's financial elder abuse in reverse. Their companion, who I now realized must be the corrupt lawyer mentioned in Dorothy's evidence file, was more direct in his criminal intent. We need to establish that she's mentally unstable and unable to complete the 30-day requirement. If we can document erratic behavior or abandonment of the property, the will becomes invalid by default. I recorded everything, including their plans to plant evidence of drug use in my belongings, and their discussion of bribing local officials to condemn the house as uninhabitable. By the time they finally gave up searching and left around midnight, I had gathered enough additional evidence to bury their legal challenges permanently. But more importantly, I had discovered something about myself during those terrifying hours hiding in Dorothy's secret room. I wasn't running away anymore. I was fighting back using intelligence and preparation rather than just hoping for the best. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly capable of protecting something I cared about. When William Chen arrived the next morning, I was ready with a complete report of everything I had discovered and documented. The Dorothy Walsh Memorial Art Foundation was about to become reality, and Marcus and Janet's criminal enterprise was about to face justice. But first, I had to complete my 30 days in the house. 7 more days to prove I could handle the responsibility Dorothy was entrusting to me, and 7 more days for my cousins to realize their decades of greed and manipulation had finally caught up with them. William Chen turned out to be a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who radiated the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of outmaneuvering opponents in complex legal battles. He arrived at the house just after sunrise, carrying 2 large briefcases and wearing an expression that mixed determination with genuine affection when he talked about Dorothy. "Your grandmother was one of the most remarkable clients I've ever represented," he said, spreading documents across the dining room table that I had cleared for our meeting. "She spent 2 years planning every detail of this inheritance process, anticipating every possible challenge Marcus and Janet might raise." The scope of Dorothy's preparation was breathtaking. She had commissioned independent psychological evaluations to document her mental competence right up until her final week. She had videotaped herself explaining her inheritance decisions in detail with timestamps that would be impossible to falsify. She had even arranged for witnesses to her daily activities, creating an unbreakable record of rational decision-making. "The recordings you made last night are the final piece we needed," William explained. "Breaking into occupied property planning to plant false evidence conspiracy to commit fraud. They've handed us enough charges to put them both in prison for several years." But Marcus and Janet weren't finished fighting. At 10 o'clock that morning, they returned to the house with a sheriff's deputy and a temporary court order claiming I was violating the will's requirements by allowing unauthorized visitors on the property. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to step outside while we verify your compliance with the inheritance terms," the deputy said apologetically. "I have orders to document any violations of the 30-day isolation requirement." William immediately produced his own legal documents. "Deputy, I'm Mrs. Walsh's authorized legal representative, and my client is in full compliance with all inheritance requirements. This court order was obtained through fraudulent misrepresentations to the judge." What followed was a tense 3-hour standoff on the front lawn, while competing lawyers argued over legal technicalities, and the deputy tried to sort out which set of documents carried more authority. Meanwhile, neighbors began gathering to watch the drama unfold, clearly taking sides in what had become Millbrook's most entertaining legal battle in decades. Tom Richardson arrived with what appeared to be half the town council, all of them carrying copies of a petition they had filed with the county courthouse. Patricia from the library brought a folder full of character witness statements about my positive interactions with community members. Even Linda Rodriguez showed up with little Emma, who immediately ran over to show me a crayon drawing she had made of the house with flowers in every window. "The whole town knows what Dorothy wanted," Patricia announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She talked about her plans for months before she died. This house is going to become an art center that serves the entire community, and Brielle is exactly the person we need to make that vision reality." By noon, it was clear that Marcus and Janet had seriously underestimated the level of community support Dorothy had built for her inheritance plan. The deputy, faced with dozens of local residents vouching for my character, and William Chen's impressive stack of legal precedents, decided to return to the courthouse for clarification rather than risk making the wrong decision. But my cousins weren't ready to give up. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus approached me with what he probably thought was a reasonable final offer. "Brielle, this has gone far enough. We're prepared to split the inheritance 3 ways if you'll just walk away from this ridiculous challenge. You'll get over $1 million with no strings attached enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. What about Dorothy's vision for the Art Foundation? Impractical nonsense from an old woman who lost touch with reality. This house is too expensive to maintain as a private residence, let alone as some kind of public facility. The responsible thing is to sell it and invest the money properly. Janet stepped closer, her voice dropping to what she clearly thought was a persuasive whisper. Think about your future, Brielle. You're a single woman with no significant savings and a job that barely pays your bills. This is your chance to be financially secure forever. Don't throw it away for some sentimental fantasy about honoring a dead woman's wishes. Looking at them both, I finally understood what Dorothy had been trying to teach me. This wasn't really about money at all. It was about the fundamental question of what inheritance should accomplish. Marcus and Janet saw Dorothy's wealth as something to be consumed and divided, a prize to be claimed by whoever could manipulate the system most effectively. But Dorothy saw her legacy as something that should grow and multiply, creating opportunities for future generations of artists and community members. The answer is no, I told them clearly. I'm completing the 30 days I'm accepting the responsibility of running the foundation, and I'm honoring Dorothy's wishes exactly as she intended. The legal victory came 3 days later when William Chen's evidence was presented to the county judge. Marcus and Janet's court order was dismissed, their corrupt lawyer was arrested for fraud, and preliminary charges were filed against both of them for elder abuse and attempted inheritance theft. But the personal victory was even sweeter. That same afternoon, I received calls from 3 different art galleries in Philadelphia and New York, all of them interested in hosting exhibitions of Dorothy's collection as a way to launch the foundation's public programs. Word was spreading through the art world about the remarkable collection that was about to become available for educational purposes. Emma Rodriguez became my first unofficial scholarship recipient when Linda agreed to let me tutor her daughter in basic art techniques twice a week. The little girl's talent was remarkable, and working with her reminded me of the joy I had felt during my first years as a teacher before budget cuts and administrative pressures had drained most of the creativity out of public education. Tom Richardson introduced me to his grandson David, a carpenter who specialized in historic renovation projects. David spent an afternoon surveying the house and estimating repair costs, concluding that the structure was fundamentally sound and that most of the visible damage could be fixed without enormous expense. Your grandmother was smart to focus on maintaining the bones of the building, David explained as we walked through room after room of faded grandeur. The foundation is solid, the roof just needs patching, and the mechanical systems can be updated without destroying the historic character. This place could be absolutely beautiful again with the right care. More importantly, David understood Dorothy's vision for the house as a community gathering place. His own background included museum renovation projects, and he immediately grasped the potential for transforming the mansion into flexible spaces that could accommodate art exhibitions, educational programs, and cultural events. The front parlor would make a perfect gallery space, he said, gesturing toward the room's tall windows and ornate ceiling details. The library could host readings and lectures. The dining room is large enough for workshops and classes, and that amazing attic space where Dorothy kept her collection could become artist studios for residents and visiting creators. As my final week in the house began, I realized that I no longer thought of the 30-day challenge as something to be endured. The house had become my home in a way that my Phoenix apartment never had, and the community of Millbrook was offering me a chance to build the kind of life I had always wanted, but never believed was possible. The foundation paperwork was completed on day 27, officially establishing the Dorothy Walsh Memorial Art Foundation with an initial endowment of $4.2 million. I would serve as executive director with a salary that was modest but sufficient, allowing me to focus on programs and community service rather than profit maximization. Marcus and Janet's criminal trial was scheduled for the following spring, but their civil challenges to the will had been permanently dismissed. Tom Richardson had been appointed to the Foundation's board of directors, along with Patricia from the library and 2 art educators from the State University. Dorothy's vision was becoming reality exactly as she had planned. But the most meaningful victory was personal. On day 28, I completed my first painting in over 3 years, a landscape view of the house and gardens as they were beginning to look after weeks of cleaning and minor repairs. The creative passion that had been buried under years of financial stress and professional disappointment was finally stirring back to life. That evening, I called my mother to give her an update on everything that had happened. Her voice carried a mixture of pride and amazement when I described the foundation plans and the community support Dorothy had arranged. "Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. When you told me about this 30-day challenge, I thought Dorothy was putting you through some kind of cruel test. I never imagined she was giving you the opportunity of a lifetime. She was teaching me to see myself the way she always did, as an artist capable of creating something meaningful, rather than just someone who settled for whatever job paid the bills. Your father and I have been talking, and we want to come visit once you're settled. We'd like to see this remarkable house and meet the community that's embraced you so completely." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Dorothy's inheritance had given me something far more valuable than money. She had given me a future I was excited about, a community that valued my contributions, and most importantly, the confidence to believe I deserved both. 2 more days and the house would officially become mine, but in all the ways that mattered, it already was home. Day 29 arrived with the first genuinely warm weather I had experienced since coming to Millbrook. Spring sunshine streamed through the clean windows I had spent weeks washing, highlighting how much progress I had made in transforming the house from a symbol of neglect into something approaching its former glory. The criminal charges against Marcus and Janet had been expanded after William Chen's investigation uncovered additional victims of their financial manipulation. 3 other elderly relatives had been systematically defrauded over the past 5 years, with forged documents transferring over $200,000 in assets to accounts controlled by my cousins. The district attorney was treating the case as a major elder abuse prosecution that could set important legal precedents. But even more satisfying than their legal troubles was watching their shock as they realized the scope of what Dorothy had actually accomplished. The house they had dismissed as a worthless burden was about to become the cultural centerpiece of an entire community. The art collection they had planned to liquidate was being valued by Sotheby's experts at over $6 million. The senile old woman they had tried to manipulate had outsmarted them at every turn. Marcus made one final attempt to negotiate on day 29, calling just after breakfast with what he presented as a magnanimous gesture. "Brielle, we've been thinking about this situation, and we're prepared to admit that Dorothy may have been more competent than we initially believed. If you're willing to sell us the house at fair market value, we'll drop all legal challenges and allow you to keep the monetary inheritance." "Marcus, in 24 hours, none of this will be your decision to make. The foundation is already established, the community programs are planned, and your criminal trial starts in 6 months. You don't understand the responsibility you're taking on. Running a nonprofit organization requires business skills you don't have. Managing a historic property requires resources you can't imagine. You'll be bankrupt within 2 years, and then what will you have accomplished? I'll have honored Dorothy's wishes and created something beautiful that will outlast all of us." The conversation ended with Marcus hanging up in frustration, but I no longer felt intimidated by his threats or predictions of failure. The past month had taught me that I was capable of far more than I had ever believed, and Dorothy's careful planning had provided me with every tool I would need to succeed. That afternoon brought the most meaningful validation of all. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from the State University's Art Department arrived with 2 graduate students to conduct a formal evaluation of Dorothy's collection for insurance and exhibition purposes. Miss Walsh, I have to tell you that your grandmother's collection is extraordinary, Dr. Morrison said as we toured the attic gallery space. She had a remarkable eye for identifying talented artists before they became famous. Some of these pieces will be worth 10 times what she paid for them. More importantly, Dr. Morrison confirmed that the collection would be perfect for the educational programs we were planning. This isn't just valuable art, it's a comprehensive survey of American artistic development over the past 70 years. Students could spend entire semesters studying the cultural and historical context of these works. The graduate students were even more enthusiastic, immediately understanding how the foundation could serve as a bridge between academic art education and community cultural programs. They volunteered to help catalog the collection and develop educational materials that would make the art accessible to visitors of all ages and backgrounds. There's nothing like this within 100 miles, one of them explained. Small towns usually have to send their students to major cities for this kind of cultural education. What you're creating here could serve the entire region. As evening approached on my 29th day, I walked through every room of the house, marveling at the transformation that had taken place. The structural problems had been identified and solutions planned. The hidden treasures had been discovered and properly cataloged. The community connections had been established and strengthened. But the most important transformation was in myself. I no longer felt like someone who taught art to pay bills while secretly believing my own creative work wasn't good enough to matter. I felt like an artist who had been given the opportunity to create something unprecedented, a living institution that would nurture creativity in others while honoring the vision of an extraordinary woman. Tom Richardson arrived just before sunset with a bottle of champagne and a broad smile. Thought you might like some company for your final evening as a challenge participant. Tomorrow you'll just be the lady of the manor. We sat on the front porch watching the sun set over gardens that were already showing signs of recovery from weeks of careful tending. The house felt peaceful in a way I was sure it hadn't for years, like it was finally preparing to fulfill its intended purpose. Dorothy would be so proud, Tom said quietly. She spent the last 2 years of her life worrying that her plans were too complicated, that maybe she was asking too much of you. She would be amazed to see how perfectly everything has worked out. Tom, can I ask you something? Did you know about the criminal evidence Dorothy had gathered against Marcus and Janet? I suspected something was happening. They came around several times, trying to convince me that Dorothy was losing her mental capacity, asking if I had noticed any concerning behaviors. It struck me as odd that they were so interested in her psychological state rather than her physical health. Why didn't you warn her? I did in my own way. I told her they seemed to be asking strange questions and suggested she might want to be careful about legal documents. That's when she decided to install the security measures and start documenting everything more carefully. The final phone call of my 29 days came just before bedtime. My mother's voice carried excitement and pride when she told me that my father had already requested vacation time so they could visit for the foundation's official opening ceremony. Brielle, I've been telling everyone about what you've accomplished there. Your old colleagues at Phoenix Elementary can't believe you're going to be running your own art foundation. They all want to plan field trips to bring their students to visit. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. I've decided not just to run the foundation, but to move to Millbrook permanently. This feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. Sweetheart, we hoped you would say that. This is the first time in years that you've sounded truly happy when we talk. Dorothy gave you exactly what you needed, didn't she? As I prepared for my final night as a challenge participant, I realized that my mother was absolutely right. Dorothy hadn't given me an inheritance. She had given me a life that matched my values and utilized my abilities in ways I never would have imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I officially took responsibility for the foundation, but they would be the kinds of challenges I was eager to meet rather than problems to be endured. For the first time since graduating from college, I was excited about my future rather than just hoping to survive it. The house settled around me with the familiar creaks and whispers that had frightened me during my first week, but now sounded like a lullaby. Tomorrow, I would wake up as the owner of a remarkable property and the director of a cultural institution that would serve the community for decades to come. But tonight, I was simply a granddaughter who had finally understood the depth of an extraordinary woman's love and wisdom, grateful beyond words for the gift of a second chance at the life I was meant to live. 6 months later, I stood in the grand parlor of what was now officially known as the Dorothy Walsh Memorial Art Foundation, watching dozens of community members admire the opening exhibition of my grandmother's collection. The house that had once felt like an overwhelming burden now buzzed with exactly the kind of energy Dorothy had always envisioned. The transformation was remarkable in every possible way. David Richardson had overseen a renovation that preserved every historic detail while updating the infrastructure to support public programs. The parlor had become a luminous gallery space where rotating exhibitions would showcase both established and emerging artists. The library hosted weekly poetry readings and book discussions. The dining room had been converted into classroom space, where Linda Rodriguez now taught art classes to children and adults alike. Most importantly, the attic had been transformed into working studio spaces for visiting artists and community members who needed professional facilities to develop their creative projects. Emma Rodriguez, now 5 years old and more talented than ever, spent every Saturday morning in the children's studio I had designed specifically for young artists. "Miss Brielle, look what I painted," Emma called out, running over with a watercolor landscape that captured the view from her studio window with surprising sophistication for someone her age. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're getting so good at mixing colors to show how light changes throughout the day." The scholarship program Dorothy had envisioned was supporting 12 local students in their artistic education, with 3 of them already accepted to prestigious art schools for the following year. The foundation had also established partnerships with regional museums and universities, creating internship opportunities that kept young talent in the area rather than losing them to big cities. Marcus and Janet's criminal trial had concluded with guilty verdicts on multiple counts of elder abuse and fraud. Marcus was serving 3 years in state prison, while Janet had received 2 years plus restitution payments that would continue for decades. Their corrupt lawyer had been disbarred and sentenced to 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. But more satisfying than their punishment was seeing how completely their predictions of failure had been proven wrong. The foundation was not only financially stable, but growing with additional donations from art lovers who had heard about Dorothy's vision through regional media coverage. We had received grants from the State Arts Council and the National Endowment for the Arts to expand our educational programming. My own artistic work had flourished in ways I never thought possible. Living in the house had reconnected me with creative inspiration I thought I had lost forever, and I was painting regularly for the first time since college. A gallery in Philadelphia was planning a solo exhibition of my landscapes and architectural studies for the spring, with several pieces already sold to collectors who had visited the foundation. "Brielle, you have to see this," Patricia called out from across the room where she was helping visitors navigate the exhibition catalog. "The guest book is already 3 pages full and it's only been open 2 hours. Reading through the comments, I was amazed by how many people understood exactly what Dorothy had been trying to create. Visitors from across Pennsylvania and neighboring states were describing the foundation as a treasure for the entire region and exactly what small-town America needs. But the comment that moved me most came from Tom Richardson. Dorothy Walsh was the most visionary person I ever knew, and her granddaughter is proving that vision can be inherited along with everything else. As the evening reception continued, I found myself standing in the exact spot where I had first discovered the safe containing Dorothy's secrets. William Chen approached with a glass of wine and an expression of obvious satisfaction. "Your grandmother would be absolutely thrilled," he said, gesturing toward the crowded rooms where art and conversation flowed together seamlessly. This is precisely what she pictured when we started planning the foundation 3 years ago. William, can I ask you something I've always wondered about? How long had Dorothy been planning to leave the inheritance to me instead of Marcus and Janet? She changed her will for the final time about 6 months after your grandfather died. She told me that watching how different family members reacted to his death had clarified everything about their true characters. Marcus and Janet immediately started pressuring her to sell properties and liquidate investments, while you were the only one who seemed to understand that her grief was more important than any financial considerations. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I never thought about inheritance at all. That's exactly why she chose you. She said you were the only family member who saw her as a person rather than as a source of potential wealth. The foundation's first year had exceeded every goal Dorothy had established. We were serving over 300 community members through various programs, hosting exhibitions that attracted visitors from across the region and providing educational opportunities that simply hadn't existed in rural Pennsylvania before. My personal life had also found its rhythm in ways I never expected. David Richardson and I had been dating for 4 months, bonding over our shared commitment to preserving the beauty and history of places that mattered to the community. He was designing an addition to the house that would provide expanded studio space for our growing artist residency program. "You know what I love most about this?" David said, appearing beside me with his own glass of wine and a smile that still made my heart skip beats. "It's not just that you saved a historic building or created a successful nonprofit. You figured out how to build the kind of life that most people only dream about." Looking around the rooms filled with people experiencing art education and community connection, I realized he was absolutely right. Dorothy's inheritance hadn't just given me financial security. It had taught me that work could be meaningful, that community could be chosen, and that creative passion was worth organizing an entire life around. The evening's final surprise came when my parents arrived earlier than expected, driving up from their hotel in time to see the foundation in full celebration mode. My father, who had always been skeptical of my artistic ambitions, spent 20 minutes studying the exhibition catalog and asking detailed questions about the educational programs. "Brielle, I owe you an apology," he said quietly as we stood together admiring one of Dorothy's prize paintings. "I spent years pushing you toward more practical career choices because I was afraid you'd never be able to support yourself as an artist. I never imagined there was a way to combine creativity with financial stability and community service." "Dad, you were trying to protect me. I understand that now. Your grandmother was smarter than all of us. She found a way to give you security and purpose and creative fulfillment all at once. This foundation is going to be your legacy, just as much as it's hers." As the reception wound down and the last visitors departed, I walked through the quiet house one more time, turning off lights and making sure everything was secure for the night. The rooms that had once felt overwhelming now felt exactly the right size for the life I was building. In the kitchen, I paused at the spot where I had found Dorothy's hidden message about trusting the house to teach me what I needed to learn. She had been right about everything the house had taught me: to see beauty in unexpected places, to value community over individual achievement, and to understand that the best inheritance is the opportunity to create something meaningful that will outlast your own lifetime. Before heading upstairs to the master bedroom that was now truly mine, I stopped in my office to update the foundation's social media accounts with photos from the opening reception. As I uploaded images of smiling visitors and excited young artists, I reflected on how different my life had become in such a short time. A year ago, I had been struggling to pay rent on a Phoenix apartment I didn't love while working at a job that drained my creativity and passion. Tonight, I was the director of a thriving cultural institution, living in a house that felt like it had always been waiting for me to come home, surrounded by a community that valued what I had to offer. But the most important difference was internal. I no longer felt like someone who had settled for less than what I really wanted. I felt like someone who had been given the opportunity to become exactly who I was meant to be, and who had been brave enough to embrace that opportunity completely. Dorothy's final gift hadn't been money or property or even artistic treasures. Her final gift had been the chance to discover that I was capable of far more than I had ever believed possible, and that sometimes the most generous form of love is creating circumstances that force someone to see their own potential clearly. As I turned off the last light and headed upstairs, I whispered a quiet thank you to the remarkable woman whose vision had transformed both of our lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as the foundation continued to grow. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be living exactly the life I had always dreamed of, but never believed I deserved. The house settled around me with the familiar sounds that had become my nightly lullaby, and I fell asleep knowing that Dorothy's greatest treasure hadn't been hidden in any safe. It had been the future she had imagined for someone she loved, and the careful planning that made that future possible. What's the most valuable inheritance you've ever received from someone who loved you? Was it money, or was it something that changed how you see yourself and your possibilities? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of unexpected transformation and family legacy. Share it with someone who might need to be reminded that sometimes the challenges that feel like punishment are actually gifts in disguise. Thank you for joining me on Brielle's journey, and I hope you'll visit again soon for more stories about the ways love can surprise us across time and distance.